Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last Alexander Galetovic webinar of the year. This time we have a sociology book, which is very well aligned with the new program in business administration and sociology that we're opening next year. The author is Shai Dromi, who is an associate senior lecturer at Harvard University. He exactly teaches sociology also in subjects about non-profits and how morals shape them. But today we have the pleasure of having the presentation of his book, Moral Mindfields, How Sociologists Debate Good Science, which is exactly goes a little bit to the point, how sociologists talk about big subjects, which was published by University of Chicago Press. It's also with Samuel Stabler. I think I said his name correctly. And we also have Danielle, who agreed to comment on the paper. Shai will present for about 40 minutes or half an hour. Then Danielle has some discussion prepared for us for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then we'll open the conversation for everyone. Okay, so thank you, Shai, for being with us.
Thank you for inviting. Let me just share my slides again. Can you see? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so thank you very much, Bernardo, for the invitation, Danilo for discussing, Gil for showing up. I'm truly honored by the invitation to participate in this series, and especially with the honor of honoring Professor Galetovic. The book, so as Bernardo said, is called Moral Mindfields: How Sociologists Debate Good Science. I know we're an interdisciplinary group, but the book also, despite the title, applies more generally to the social sciences and the ways in which academics debate what qualifies as good academic work. So very briefly, the book looks at the justifications and criticisms sociologists commonly use in discussing research, particularly those that carry moral judgment about what sort of research is good, in a moral sense, good sociological research. So Sam Stabler and I use current pragmatic sociology in order to underline kind of the multiple types of moral evaluations sociologists apply to their research. And we show how those moral kind of frameworks animate major debates in our discipline. Um, the book ultimately argues that these debates actually promote innovation and creativity in sociological research. So, if sometimes we think that debate and kind of visceral disagreement might stifle productivity, we actually try to point to the productive, creative, innovative sides of such debate. So, in today's talk, I'll just give you a very brief overview of the book. And then we'll talk about one of our case studies from the book, which is a debate over secularization in the sociology of religion. But before we do all that, I want you to, I have an unusual request from you. I'd like to actually fast forward in your minds to the end of this talk or any other talk that you've been to. And I'd like to think about several possible responses to such a talk once the Q&A starts. Okay, so um, one common type of comment would be, your data doesn't really support your claims. You have all sorts of measurement and inference problems in your paper. Let me spell them out for you. Someone else might say something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm surprised you're not in conversation with scholars in the field adjacent to you, political science or anthro. You should really try to do more interdisciplinary work." Someone else might say something like, "Well, you've said nothing about your position in the field in relation to your interviewees, and I'm worried about the power dynamics between you as the privileged kind of researcher and them." Someone else might quote, a great sociologist or some prominent academic and say, well, this is the most eminent scholar in your field, and you either haven't mentioned them or you're completely ignoring their theories. And maybe someone else will say something along the lines of, there are serious political implications to your findings. And actually, if we think about it, your paper all too easily reinforces existing biases and supports regressive conservative politics. And I'm sure you can imagine also, additional like typical types of responses. If we take a step back, we might also say that each type of response corresponds to a different measure of worth in evaluating academic work. What do I mean by that? Our first comment was really about the methodological adequacy of the paper, right? A very common way of critiquing and arguing about papers. But the second comment was really about interconnectivity and interdisciplinarity. Coming with the framework that sees science that's interconnected, that crosses boundaries, that brings people from different fields together, is positive, right? Is a good science. The third has to do with positive and equal relations with research subjects, common in sociology, but also anthropology. The idea that we need to be very careful about treating our research subjects ethically, our interviewees, our people who filled out surveys for us, and to be very clear about the power dynamic between us and them. Um, and our fourth comment has to do really with the charismatic field leaders, right? Paying our respects to big major figures in our field, citing them, explaining how we relate to them, and so on. And our fifth has to do with the effects on civil society, right? Which are another way in which we often evaluate social scientific work, right? What will be the actual potential contribution to civic equality or to civil society of the specific research. Um, and we can of course think of other examples, but if we think about it, each of these provides an example of a different moral repertoire. When I say moral repertoire, I mean collectively held grammars by which individuals define, evaluate, and debate what constitutes the common good, and in this case, particularly when it comes to academic research. And of course, we can think of additional repertoires, evaluating based on the degree of creativity, on the level of appeal. Like, does people's research appeal to a broad readership, and so on and so forth. And this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but these are just examples. So, in other words, what we want to show in moral minefields is exactly this, right? The moral debates, moral reasoning, moral justifications are endemic to social scientific knowledge production. With debates such as these, kind of this hypothetical Q&A session, providing opportunity to think through the broader scholarly and public aims of the discipline, in this case, sociology, but of course, this applies to other disciplines as well. Negotiating the boundaries of what qualifies as sociology, like what should be part of our discipline and what shouldn't. Rethinking research trajectories that are kind of problematic in light of their ethical limitations, and generating new research trajectories in areas that are contentious, right, in contentious terrains. Um, our core theoretical orientation sees morality as a core aspect of social knowledge production. And we're following this Jeffrey Alexander, for example, who showed us that scientific traditions are actually laden with meaning, and are not just about the numbers and the findings, but also about their social meanings. We're also following Michel Amont and other scholars who have looked at moral evaluation in social science production, in social knowledge production. For example, when it comes to debates about who to hire, what sort of qualities a person who receives a prestigious fellowship should have, and so on and so forth. We're also drawing on Andrew Abbott's work, where the idea that we should actually investigate systematic normative evaluation of research literature is very, very pronounced. More specifically in the book, we're drawn Boltanski and Thévenot's work on moral justifications in pragmatic action, where we particularly borrowed their term repertoires as mutually exclusive logics of worth, right? That kind of corresponds to what we just saw, in the colloquium Q&A, with people using different ideas of what good science looks like, how do we know it when we see it, and so on and so forth. Boltanski and Thévenot provide a great framework to trace resolutions between incompatible claims. For example, what do we do if a hiring committee is stuck between a candidate who is very, very prolific, but perhaps isn't very creative, right? Isn't very original, versus someone who's working on a very original creative project, but isn't publishing a lot. So these are the sort of like debates and resolution-seeking moments that this framework looks at. Within this theoretical tradition, we're also assuming that people are not consistent all the time, right? So the same actor can actually use different measures of worth at different times. So, for example, our administrator who was very concerned about, teaching evaluations not being very satisfying, and that students are not happy with the level of teaching, might also at a different moment be talking about the need for more networking with other universities and so on. So it's not so there's no idea that the same person will be using the same logic at all times. The idea is that people can use diverse and sometimes even contradictory scripts, right? So going back to our colloquium, right? One of the possible explanations to why we have these different kind of ways of evaluating research are that each person is just taking a position that's analogous to their field position, right? So, for example, that the person who's saying that we need to focus on methodological adequacy is the well-established like senior professor. The older professor will be talking about charismatic field leaders. The perhaps untenured kind of new professor will be talking about like maintaining good relations with research subjects. But to this, we're answering that actually this discounts the creativity and the originality that many of us have when we're evaluating research. It assumes that we're all seeing basically through the same lenses, which reduces basically and forecloses the options for creativity and for innovation. Okay. All right. Now, in our book, we are looking at three kind of maneuvers that are typical of sociological debates that are occurring, and we kind of try to exemplify and see where exactly they occur. The first is a situation where scholar B is responding to scholar A or to field A's work and saying that is entirely illegitimate. Okay, so complete delegitimation of existing research, basically someone getting up at the colloquium and saying, I'm sorry, but this is what you're doing is unacceptable. The second framework is also critical, right? Scholar B would be quite critical of scholar A, but at the same time, scholar A would provide kind of a different trajectory by which to address to continue the research. So they'll do somewhat of a reform change to their methods or to their assumptions that would be relatively superficial, right? And thus in allow them on one hand to evade Scholar B's contention, but also to continue doing their work more or less in the same direction. We're calling this partial reform. The third option, which we're calling reconstitution, has field A and field B locked in a debate, basically a debate that seems ongoing, not very productive, kind of stalled. So much so that new researchers really don't want to get into that field, so they won't have to become embroiled in a moral controversy. Um, and in order to evade it, they actually create kind of a way around it, like a way to say, you know what, I am not I'm not trying to intervene in this debate. I'm doing something that's kind of related, but it doesn't like kind of step on your terrain, and I'm distancing myself from it altogether. So that's reconstitution, and we'll see examples of all three trajectories in just a second. One of the main case studies for us was the debates that existed in the late 19th and late 20th and early 21st century in US sociology of religion about secularization. In sociology, there's been a long trajectory of assumption that religion is in gradual decline. In a sense, as people become more modern, they become less attached to religious traditions and adopt more secular frameworks in order to think about the world. This definitely goes back to Max Weber's work, but perhaps more prominently is Peter Berger's work, the book, the Cosmopolitan Canopy, which is basically a statement about where we're going as a society, that the more societies adopt scientific logic, the more that becomes a widely understood framework for thinking about the world, the more religion will gradually be displaced as a sense-making framework. And this has seen a partial empirical support over the 20th century with the gradual decline of religious attendance and participation in Western societies. However, also over the late 20th century, we're seeing multiple signs of the decline of religion being far more moderate than predicted by earlier sociologists. Interestingly, we're seeing the resurgence of various forms of religiosity in the US, the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and that is both through televangelism, through new forms of evangelical Christianity and participation. We're seeing also new forms of religiosity, such as new wave, new religious traditions emerge, and so on. And also, we're seeing the resurgence of religiosity in the post-Soviet world, in particular in Russia, where Orthodox Christianity, once communism has fallen, becomes much more pronounced, much more vibrant, and occupies a very central place in civil life in Russia. So toward the late 20th century, we're seeing a growing criticism of the idea that secularization is just a done deal, basically, among sociologists, and that we should basically be free to assume that religious no longer merits much religious sociological research. And here we're seeing three responses to this. One, a complete delegitimation of the secularization thesis. Okay, so these are researchers that were working primarily in the late 1990s, early 2000s. such as Rodney Stark, who said famously, we need to carry the secularization doctrine to the graveyard of failed theories. We need to realize that ongoing attention to secularization, the fact that secularization has been such a strong assumption, that it has often diverted our attention from many interesting and important questions about restrictions on religious participation and freedom. And religious freedoms have much in common with other human rights. So in other words, understanding, for example, how state repression of religion kind of downgraded religious participation is actually something that's important for us to like really delve into, really understand, understand how religion is rising back again now that Russia and other post-Soviet countries are no longer communist. So first step was delegitimation. Second phase was what we call partial reform, with a strong emphasis on understanding religious decline in a better way, right? Understanding it through new tools, emphasis on the efficiency of our sociological like tools, basically, to understand this case study. And here we're seeing that, yes, there's a criticism of the secularization thesis, but sociologists of religion find like ways to slightly reform and slightly attune their research to empirical reality without really abandoning completely the idea of that secularization is happening. So one of the prominent examples is Stephen Warner, who wrote comparative institutional religion research of religion, unburdened by the secularization expectations of the older paradigms, will serve to demystify the concept of American exceptionalism. Until that has been accomplished, the exception may well have be taken as the rule. So, in other words, where previous researchers of religion and its decline have focused on the United States, they're saying like, well, we'll get a better understanding of religious decline or lack of decline if we really look comparatively internationally at what religion is actually doing in our society. In a different way, Jose Casanova, prominent sociologist of religion, wrote, yes, but we need to understand better what is secularization and under what conditions it occur, rather than assume that it just exists throughout the world as is. So from his book, Public Religions, he writes, the public resurgence of religion took place in places such as Poland, the United States, Brazil, Nicaragua, and Iran, all places which can hardly be characterized as secularized wastelands. What we witnessed in the 1980s was not the birth of new religions or the return of the sacred revolutions of old living traditions, and the assumptions of public roles by precisely Fro's religion traditions with both theories of secularization and cynical theories of religious revivals assumed they were becoming ever more privatized and irrelevant in the modern world. In other words, secularization should not be assumed to be just a natural condition. Religion can emerge and rise in particularly Western or kind of modernized societies. And of course, there was additional work by scholars kind of trying to like get more into the philosophical underpinnings of what secularization is. Talal Assad famously, and others. And the point is, all of this work was in order to say, well, we're not abandoning the secularization thesis, but we're refining it, right? We're finding out like more information about it. We're investigating it in more detail, and this way we'll be able to give a fuller picture. Now, over time, There's been a significant debate between the first group of scholars, the one who said that basically we should abandon the secularization thesis completely, and the second group of scholars who said, no, we should understand secularization in context, right? In the historical, in the global context, and so on, and understand better how to address it. This created a situation where much of the sociology of religion was just focused on this question of yes, secularization, no secularization, and any new entrant to the field had to be very careful about marking their stance with relation to this specific, very hot topic, which was also very emotional for many scholars. And hence we have a third group that actually has been working more and more on evading that question and not even asking like whether secularization is happening or not happening, but rather working to find new paths of research that can say, okay, we know that that's a big question, secularization, but at the same time, we want to study things that kind of like perhaps related, but are not don't directly speak to this debate. One example is Feng Yang, who wrote in a presidential address to the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, the definition of religion can sometimes be a matter of life and death. Why would your colleagues and administrators in the departments of sociology, psychology, political science, economics, and other disciplines want to allocate scarce resources to the study of the indefinable? In other words, if we are saying if we are so caught up in these like very painstaking definitional like questions of yes secularization, no secularization, and so on and so forth, we might lose our public legitimacy and not be able to raise funds, hire, and so on. Okay, so the question here really became like, how do we maintain the marketability of what we're doing? That people will want it, that people will be interested in it if we're only debating so much. And this is a recent tweet by a sociologist of religion, Sam Perry, kind of saying the same thing, right? You know, why I'm writing a book basically saying why the study of religion is a benefit to all of us and why we must prioritize, fund, and hire for it, right? So these are various attempts to move beyond this the kind of debacle. Many of these studies looked at the experience of religiosity, including in a modernizing, secularizing kind of context, the ways in which people who profess no religiosity have um, manage their identity in religious contexts, and so on and so forth, but without really getting into the question of where religion is going as a whole in society. Um, so to summarize, right? So we're seeing the three, like the first group doing a complete delegitimation of this secularization thesis. The second doing partial reforms to their original research, and the third circumventing or reconstituting the field in a different way in order to avoid kind of basically a standoff between two factions. Now, the book looks more generally about at these at these debates. So we look at various debates on the sociology of religion. We're also looking at areas that are often considered no-go zones, areas that are have extreme controversy. For example, the study of race and inequality, in particular around what was called the culture of poverty, as well as post-genomic concepts of race that are emerging due to the influx of genetic data into social scientific data sets. We're showing like various partial reforms in different fields in sociology, political sociology, especially of cosmopolitanism and of methodological nationalism. And we're demonstrating also in-depth reconstitution in the fields of demography and gender, specifically around fertility expectations and breastfeeding. And we're showing that along these different fields, we're seeing similar patterns of debate happening, but also similar ways of innovating and thinking how to address ethical questions such as these and how to move forward from debacles that seem to be stalling entire fields. So let me broaden the picture a little bit. So one of the Kuhnian way of thinking about progress in the sciences in general is through paradigm shifts, right? There's a great deal of anomalies of findings that don't quite fit a paradigm, and at some point the entire paradigm shifts. What we want to do is basically to show that yes, that happens, but also there's a great deal of thinking about morality and moral justification, moral criticism, and ethical limitations that also motivates disciplinary growth and disciplinary change. That includes sometimes moving away from problematic fields or moving away from problematic assumptions that are making unwarranted or harmful implications on the populations that you study, but also like bringing in new fields, thinking of new methods of research and new ways of theorizing that are better suited for today's social problems. So the aim of the broader aim of the book is really to rethink the like existing ideas about change and growth in the social sciences. We're currently collaborating with a colleague using computational methods in order to kind of trace more in finer resolution how those changes work and what their implications are. I think there's also kind of a second element that's intertwined here with change, which is about academic civility. In the sense that our book aims not to try to explain what are the underlying interests or motivations that cause certain researchers to act in a certain way and not others, and so on. Whereas we're actually trying to focus on what academic actors are actually saying and how they're actually responding to challenges that they face in their work, kind of rather than try to like kind of excavate their unseen motives. Um, and this means that we're also treating moral claims as just a natural feature of our field. Is something that we all experience in diverse situations, ranging from the faculty meeting to the angry reviewer of our manuscript to the colloquium, right? Is something that is part of our scientific work. We also highlight the fact that even though we have multiple ways of evaluating research, we tend to be able to coexist with multiple ways of seeing what's moral to do. Our aim is really to prompt more explicit and open thinking about plurality and pluralism in the social sciences, specifically around recognizing multiple forms of evaluating worth, where many of them might be valid at the same time. For example, is this finding methodologically rigorous, and or is it also contributing to civil society and contributing to equality? So let me leave off with that. Thank you again for your participation. I'd love to get emails from you if anyone's interested in discussing this further. You can email me or Sam, and I look forward to our Q&A.
Thank you, Shay. Si alguien quiere preguntar, puede escribir ahí en el Q&A. y si no quiere escribirlo en inglés, si quieren lo escriben en español y yo lo traduzco. So I just told them that they can write their questions. But let's have Daniel discuss it for his discussion, and then we'll open the floor, and maybe if someone wants to talk directly, we can give them the microphone. Thank you, Daniel.
Okay, can you hear me well? Yes? Okay. So I'm gonna read it and learned a great deal from it. It's nicely crafted, intelligently argued, and its arguments are quite timely. A couple of days after the US presidential election, the question that inspires the book could hardly be more timely for people in academia. What is the role that moral values and concerns play for practicing social scientists? If today we were in a social theory seminar, I would like to have discussed how its pragmatic outlook may engage with, for instance, critical realism. But I think questions of worth aren't captured fully if we remain only within the realms of discourse and repertoires. Also, I am genuinely intrigued by how exactly the authors' commitment to moral pluralism relates to their rejection of moral relativism. But this isn't a social theory seminar, so I want to focus on arguments that are relevant to a wider audience of social scientists, like the one we have with us today. So we've all heard that we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and perhaps we shouldn't do so by its title either. But in the next 10 minutes, I may try my luck against conventional wisdom and use both the title, Moral Mindfields, and the subtitle, How Sociologists Debate Good Science, to try and unpack what I see as some of the book's main arguments. Let me start with the title. Moral Minefield, it's an excellent metaphor for what the book actually does. It discusses several ways in which sociologists have and continue to tackle challenging moral issues in society. The 3 substantive chapters in the book look precisely at a series of such contentious questions. Chapter 2 look at research on racism, poverty, and genetics, and is, in my view, the most accomplished in the book. I found the reconstruction and current assessment of the different ways in which the nature v. nurture debate continues to take place highly illuminating. Chapter 3, which focuses on how debates on cosmopolitanism at the turn of the century influenced further studies on nationalism, I found somewhat less successful. I think the discussion here misconstrues somehow the main point of that debate. The cosmopolitan critique of methodological nationalism had more to do with treating the nation state as the focal point of social life than with nationalism as a political discourse or social identity. Chapter 4, on the politics of fertility and breastfeeding, is absolutely fascinating, both in its historical depth and the ways in which it shows feminist and conservative positions interlocking in highly complicated ways as they are drawn to conflicting evidence on fundamental questions. All these topics are, to my mind, truly moral minefields, because regardless of what sociologists argue for or against, they have to be able to justify that they are up to the task of making meaningful contributions on issues that divide public opinion acutely. Indeed, at stake here are some issues that touch on the very moral fabric of society itself: biological inheritance, cultural essentialism, the power of identity, sex, maternity, gender. Crucially, the book demonstrates that to the extent that sociology is able to navigate this minefield successfully, the discipline that comes at the other end is actually more diverse and more robust. It is better sociology than the one we had before. But when I think its title helped us get a clear sense of why this is a significant book, I think the subtitle, How Sociologists Debate Good Science, doesn't really do as good a job in highlighting what, to my mind, are some of its more original contributions. Ostensibly, the book's key arguments seems to back this side up to lap, because it shows that sociologists do have different views about what constitutes good science, and that these differences are not merely theoretical, methodological, or even empirical. As they engage in scholarly debates, their notions of the good in good science are scientific as well as moral. That is, the good science sociologist debate must also include the ethical dimension of their research, the social values they uphold, the groups they seek to help, the prejudices they are interested in fighting against. Even if the book did only this, it will already be an important one, a timely reminder that however scientific we see our task to be, they are never only strictly scientific. And even as we agree that doing good science must remain at the center of our concerns, the good in the good science has a moral dimension or a moral side built into it. My difficulty with the subtitle is that the book does more than this. And I should like to suggest that its key contribution lies in something philosophically more profound and sociologically more far-reaching than a debate about good science. So let me briefly, in the next 5 minutes, elaborate what I mean by this in three different arguments. First, while taking sociology as its main discipline, and this is something Shai mentioned in passing at the beginning, the book draws from studies, debates, and materials that include at least medical anthropology, demography, nationalism studies, political science, and political philosophy. I'm sure there are more. In my reading, at least then, this isn't really about how sociologists debate good science, but an interdisciplinary book about how the social sciences articulate their own normative commitments. And they do so in two interrelated registers. With regards to wider society, they have to justify how exactly is it that their knowledge has public relevancy. And in relation to their own academic communities, they need to clarify what are the value commitments that they mobilize as they put forward scholarly work as scholarly work. The book deploys interdisciplinary sources, and its lessons, it seems to me, have a wider interdisciplinary appeal, not least because its own discussion in the different chapters shows that the last things that matters when we face substantive moral issues is the policing of strict disciplinary border. Nobody cares if it's sociology or anthropology, if one abortion is at stake. Second, I think the book's most important argument, and this is also something that Shai just highlighted, is that the value of moral pluralism. The social sciences mirror society insofar as they have different moral views about pretty much everything under the sun. But the book demonstrates that far from being a weakness or an obstacle to overcome, moral pluralism strengthens external debate, activates different constituencies, and helps articulate a wide range of concerns. As it keeps an eye on blind spots, unintended consequences, or on those who have been left behind, moral pluralism is a positive self-correcting force that drives research forward. This is a really important point. There is little to fear and much to gain in embracing the empirical fact that different social scientists do have different value commitments. Indeed, internal moral pluralism within our discipline may well be one of our contributions to civic life itself. My last point. The book does more than studying how social scientists debate good science, because it demonstrates that their ideas of the good speak constantly, yet often inconsistently, to questions of ethics and morality, identity and justice, power and inequality. As the book unpacks different repertoires that social scientists use in making these arguments, I kept on coming back to the idea that under the term morality, the book discusses at least three different things that I believe we ought to differentiate more clearly. There are ethical questions that have to do with how we do research, and this range from intellectual integrity to our duty of care towards our subjects. There are also political questions regarding the underpinnings or policy implications of our studies. And there are also normative questions regarding the ways in which society sees some issues of this kind in opposite, often conflicting ways. My point here is that I think we need different terms to talk about the internal demands of social research, that I would call sort of ethical questions, the political implications of that same research, policy implications, and the ways in which society itself is divided on these very normative questions. Some of us have referred to this as the normative turn in sociology, which points precisely in the direction of how discussions about morality within the social sciences need to take this, at least the three, need to take into account and differentiate these three different domains: ethics in our research, politics of our commitments, normativity within society. So let me conclude by picking up on a joke with which the authors opened the book. Toying with the idea of the good science, they make a reference to the sitcom The Good Place. I don't remember much about the sitcom, I confess, but I do recall watching it in the UK many years ago, together with my then little daughter, who shares the name with the protagonist. Although I am fully in favor of moral pluralism, there is one thing I do remember well from The Good Place that I share wholeheartedly. Nobody can honestly say that frozen yogurt was ever a good idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. I had some questions. Carmen, do you want me to read it? Or I can open the microphone for you, okay? I'm gonna open the microphone.
Can
Oh, and then I let you react at the end, okay, Shai? Or you want to react right now?
Whatever is more convenient.
Let's. I prefer you close. Okay, Carmen. Carmen, hi.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really interesting research. I have a more general question, or in the beginning of your slides and how on the debates that could arise, I wanted to ask you how have sociologists and social scientists more generally addressed the possible political implication of their work, and how should, based on your research, address them. In particularly, I'm thinking, for example, when the evidence generated by studies might be used or even misconstrued by views that are morally opposed to the researcher. We have seen some recent examples where researchers have abstained or even delayed the publication of results, or on the other hand, have published them and have been deeply criticized. So how one should address this?
So I had another question. I feel like it sounds a little bit. I like that academia, we always think that we're in a vacuum, in a rational world and everything, but I wonder how right now we're in a society that changes a lot, right? It changed a lot from this week. I mean, it's different this week than the one before. And how, like, I also saw I think it was Scientific America that like signed a letter supporting a particular candidate. So how do you think about those phenomena? Which is like you're restricting pluralism, right? Because you're literally saying this is the political position. So how do you think about that too? Thank you. If you want, let me see if I have something else. If you want, you can start answering. I think here we close because we're out of time.
Excellent question. First of all, Daniel, I'm humbled, and aside from saying yes, I agree. I I'm really like appreciative of this deep and generous reading of the book. I do want to say, however, so what drew us to pragmatic, so both Sam and I grew up in critical realism. Like we went to Yale in the kind of mid 2010s. Gorski had that big I mean, they had the big fellowship there. There's so much happening around critical realism. But what ended up drawing us to pragmatic sociology was much more epistemological than ontological, which is the idea that we really can't, we felt we can't say anything about the underlying kind of like more deeper moral stances that individuals had without first of all like laying out the field of like what are they actually doing, what are they concretely like, not in philosophical ways, but in the average like faculty meeting or the average I don't know, this debate, I don't know, panel at ASA and so on. That's really what drew us to pragmatic sociology. We are absolutely not opposed or like even maybe in our own future work to thinking more about the ontologies that undergird this. But we think we wanted our discussion to start with the concrete, like with the concretely visible first, right? With the understanding that also, us and our colleagues have a critical sense that we should take seriously, kind of at least as our starting point, right? So that was what drew us there. That also explains why, and I agree with your typology of three different moralities, but it also explains why in this context we're treating them similarly, because we were looking at the form in which the argument was made rather than while allowing the speakers to actually determine the content. So rather than us starting with a preconceived notion of what is moral or what is morality, we wanted to hear what people say when they're thinking about morality or morally moral justifications. And I'll also say that our typology is is fluid, right? There's more acceptable ways to defend research. Things change like the frameworks change over time, with some of them being more common and some less. But I think for that specific reason, we didn't want to like kind of start imposing our own typologies in this specific book. I would also say, and I agree with your comment that this is actually, the title says sociology, but it's actually it's a very, very interdisciplinary field, reflecting the interdisciplinarity of our discipline, right? Because demographers are kind of sociologists, but at the same time, they're so embedded in public health and in political science and so on. And I think part of the debate is also, as you said, kind of about delineating our discipline, right? And saying like okay, so in that case, what is sociology and what ought to be sociology? As a minor last comment, so we recognize that the discourse on cosmopolitanism had to do first and foremost with nation state. But as Alexander has shown, but the concrete application of that of the cosmopolitan ideas across many publications actually spilled over into nationalism, with nationalism becoming construed as the ultimate evil of our time and the reason for many social evils to occur. So in a way we're not talking specifically about the theorists who kind of were at the front end of criticizing nation states, but rather at the more general application of these ideas that sometimes continues to this day. For Carmen, so Yeah, addressing the political implications of the work is something we do discuss in the book. There's a book by Arlie Hochschild called "Strangers in Their Own Land" that came out in 2016, I believe in October 2016 or something along those lines. It was an ethnography of right-wing, very conservative voters in Louisiana, where Arlie Hochschild spent several years doing an ethnography. And the book really brought out their side of the story, basically, the deep narrative, their perception of why would they be voting Republican even when the Republican policies are really hurting them at the end of the day, and so on and so forth. The book came out, and a month later, Donald Trump was elected. I guess I should say now was elected for the first time for president. The book was quite a controversy because for some readers, this was read as kind of like a implicit endorsement slash acceptance of Trumpist views as kind of being, acceptable, normal, that they deserve sympathy and so on. And Hochschild did a lot of work interviewing, publicly speaking, and so on, like distancing herself from this idea, and rather like what we would call in the book, like kind of moving to what we would call a civic repertoire, where it's saying like in order for us to be a functioning civil society, we need to understand that it is a moral imperative for us, everyone, to understand how these voters are thinking, right, and what motivates them, and it's in our collective benefit, right? So kind of like changing the narrative from people saying, well, she's endorsing, to like she's actually like providing something that all of civil society could use, was a very good move on her part. It's one of the few sociology books that became a bestseller in the in the US over the past like decade. And to Bernardo, pluralism versus institutional voice. That's a big question in many U.S. institutions right now. Before the elections, even before the elections, Gaza and Israel, and Ukraine, and should we make a statement? And if we do make a statement, what's going to happen to people who disagree with us or in our institution? I think more and more institutions are are actually leaning away from making statements, and Harvard has released a statement on institutional neutrality, in the sense that if the university step away from trying to intervene as an institution in that debate, in any debate that's outside it, specifically higher education, we would allow and support pluralism on our campuses. So it does seem to me that that's the direction that more and more, at least in the United States, the more universities are leaning. It's actually not a new phenomenon; it's an old phenomenon. Spearheaded by the University of Chicago in the 70s, right? And they've had a long policy standing on that. Right now, the day after the elections, it's very hard to say the university is neutral. But I think the fact that the university didn't make any sort of official unified statements on the election, or in the previous election, by the way, the fact that any of the messaging I've seen here was only about providing support, providing forums for discussion, and so on, but nothing specific about the potential threats that we do face from new Trump administration. I think that that's a sign that we are moving in the pluralistic direction.
Okay, great. I don't know if you want to say something, Daniel. No. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Shai. This was very interesting because we have to learn how to debate. And I also felt that everything that you said kind of applied to economics too. So you can add economics to your list of social sciences.
I will say that we're often curious about economics because, from the sociology perspective, so we just mentioned, sociology is very loosely defined, right, as a field. Econ is much more, it appears from the outside to be more clearly defined, having like kind of stricter protocols of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So I think it's fascinating case for like another study or follow-up study of what's acceptable and what is.
When you mentioned it, I felt like a lot of we discuss a lot of methodology, but it's our way to hide the other kind of complaints that we have about someone's work. Like I don't say that I don't agree with the consequences, but I start to be more picky about the methodological stuff. So well, you can think about it. Okay, thank you so much. This was great. I'll send you the link, and thanks to everyone that came. So and thanks, Daniel. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.